Hello everyone, this is the video session for this Thursday, the first week of classes. We will be going over a couple things about Chapter 1 since I will not be there. So I would recommend you take some notes. You can pull up the PowerPoint as we get to it. First I want to go through a couple things. Remember to make sure and get your background check and fingerprinting done quickly. I try to get in touch with Dr. Runyon really quick and get that put through. If you think that you've done one that's close enough to work, then I believe it has to be within the last year. Contact Bill Runyon's office and double check that. Make sure that they have it on file, that they can see that. His office is on the second floor of Levenger. Then make sure that you've gone through and clicked the link for the placement that we talked about on Tuesday to make sure you can get your placement started. If you do work at a district already, please make sure and put that on that placement so that Mr. Runyon and I both know where you're going to be observing and things like that. Make sure, watch for anything that is red. What I do is, as I go through an update for the semester, I will change the folders and some of the items to red. Now the web links will not go to red, they will be black, but the like Chapter 1, the purpose of and promise of special education is in red, and all the web links are in black. Those have all been taken care of. Let's see here, kind of clicking things off as I go. I will always, as you look, go ahead and get into Blackboard if you haven't already. I'll give you a few minutes to get there. You will see, once you get there, you will see if you go to Course Documents, that's where all of your notes will be. So you can go ahead and go to Course Documents for this one here. I will try to include a module for each week that we do. So since we are an 8-week course, there's going to be multiple weeks, multiple chapters in each week. So if you scroll down, we've already done the SPED intro. That's what I did on Tuesday night. Hopefully you've taken a look at your information on there and take a look at special education in Missouri. Then you'll see our Chapter 1 module, and basically I've got number 1, background check. We just talked about that. Application for placement, need to get that in. Take a pre-quiz in Chapter 1, just like we talked about on Tuesday. You need to take the quiz for the chapter before we discuss the chapter. So I would recommend you go ahead and take the pre-quiz before you get started tonight, and you will have, as long as you get the pre-quiz done today on Thursday, then you can take the quiz unlimited amount of time up until we take the 1 through 3 test. So anyway, once you get done with those 4 items, then you'll go ahead and go on and make sure and do the discussion board on benefits to labeling. I also, a reminder, you have all the important papers in there about placement. That's where you'll find the link from Bill Runyon, observation permission forms, and the course syllabus again in there also. So let's scroll down. And we're going to open up to Chapter 1, the purpose of special education. You'll see that I have day 1. We've already done that. I would recommend you open up the next link, which is Chapter 1 summary and discussion questions. It will give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today and what you will be listening to today as we go through. I'm waiting for it to go. What the PowerPoint that we will be doing, there's my notes and lecture. And I would just go ahead and get all of these open, and then Chapter 1 notes and lecture. I'd just go ahead and open up all of those links. You will notice that my notes in Chapter 1 is a PowerPoint. So we're going to get down and scroll through this here. And I'm going to go ahead and go through this like I was in the classroom discussing about it. And we will see just how much time we have. I will try to keep this down to about an hour, maybe a little bit more, depending on how we get through this. But the objectives on here, let me go ahead and get this set up for me. That way I can go ahead and see it like I would for you. Okay, the chapter objectives. First of all, the first 2 or 3 chapters are basically a lot of terms. You're going to distinguish between an impairment, a disability, a handicap, and at risk. Identify the percentage of school-age children served in special education and name the most prevalent categories. Explain why disability labels do not tell us what and how to teach and why labels are used in special education. Identify some key court cases and federal legislation that have led to mandates for a free, appropriate education for children with disabilities. And then we'll also define and give an example of each of the 3 types of intervention: preventative, remedial, and compensatory terms. Describe the defining dimensions of special education and identify several challenges facing the field of special education. Now, what I've done on this one, typically what I will do is the day that you all are that we come in to discuss a chapter, like today is chapter 1, I would have gone through and looked at the quizzes and go ahead and pick the top 5 questions that you missed as a class, and then I would go ahead and discuss those. Since I'm doing this on Sunday night, I'm going to go ahead and leave up the ones that have been commonly missed in the past and kind of give you an idea of what I'll be doing then in class as we start discussing. The primary one that we've missed in the class is early intervention services are prescribed and implemented according to an individualized family service plan, an IFSP. And they are not mandated for infants, not funded by ADA, and also not for children who are gifted and talented. You'll find that information on page 15. So I will tell you what the correct answer is, what the correct answers aren't, and also where to find it so that you can study. Another one is, in what way is IDEA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 alike? They both require placement in the most integrated setting possible. They are not provide. I don't know about you, but I'm getting tons of phone calls on my phone that are not related to anything I need. So turn my phone and everything else off, I hope. Not provide funds for people with disabilities, and not both civil rights laws. So that's on page 20 that you'll find the answer there. Characteristic of primary prevention. It is designed to reduce the number of new cases of disabilities, is what primary prevention is all about. It's not to eliminate the effects of risk factors on those exposed. It's not for people who are already affected by a problem, and not designed to prevent the effects of a disability from worsening. And those are found on page 25. One of the last ones there. Which of the following statements about handicapped is not true? And are both evident at birth or shortly thereafter birth? So remember, I asked which was not true. They are the result from negative attitudes of others, pose problems in some environments, and may also be a disability if it leads to other problems. And that's found on page 3 and page 4. And another one, Julia was diagnosed with bone cancer at age 6. It was necessary for doctors to amputate her right leg below the knee. According to this terminology, Julia is what? The real answer is impaired. She is not handicapped, she's not challenged, and is also not at risk. And this is from page 3. Another one, Park versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania granted free appropriate public education to, and it is to students who were previously deemed unable to profit from instruction. It's not students with speech and language impairments, or students with intellectual disabilities, or students with disabilities. And that was all found on page 10. There is another 2 or 3 there, but I'm going to skip through those. What we would typically do in a night is I would ask you if there's any questions that we can talk about those a little bit more so that you definitely understood those questions. Since this is online through a video, I'm going to bypass that a little bit right now, but that is what we would typically do in a class to start out as we're starting to talk about a chapter. One of the first things is, your book you're reading is book on exceptional children. I actually have it right here. I actually have it in a binder instead, but you should get that book. You will need it. All of the questions from the quizzes are taken directly from the book, so you will need it. But I will go through a few things on the PowerPoint. I will not go through all the questions. Part of a college class is I'm expecting you to read the chapters before we discuss, and I'm going to ask that you have questions ready before you come to class so that I can help you with those. I will not normally read through all the slides. We will go through the ones that we feel we need to, but we will bypass the rest of them. So you will need to have the book to read. But who are exceptional children? Exceptional children differ from the norm either below or above to such an extent that they require an individualized program of special education and related services to fully benefit from education. The term students with disabilities is more restrictive than exceptional children, as it does not include children who are gifted and talented. So we're going to discuss gifted and talented because they are part of the larger term exceptional children. However, many of you will go into special education, which does not include those gifted and talented. The next one is the 4 key terms. This one you will want to know. You will notice that sometimes on my slides I will have items that are highlighted. This one here is highlighted in red, so this means it's probably going to be on a test somewhere down the road. But impairment is loss or reduced function of a particular body part or organ. Where a disability exists when an impairment limits the ability to perform certain tasks. And a handicap is a problem or disadvantage encountered when interacting with the environment. And at risk are children who have a greater than usual chance of developing a disability. So you will need to look through those. There will be some questions related to that on tests, and it will help you better understand what a disability is and what it is not, especially as we go through some of the examples that the quizzes use as far as people's names and whether they are one of these terms. I want you to think about, when does a disability become a handicap? In class we would discuss this. What do you think? What are your comments? I'd like for you to think about it right now and kind of write your thoughts down on paper for a few minutes, and then come back. And I want to go ahead and take a few seconds. You can put pause on your video and write down some ideas and some comments, and then we'll go on. Okay, if we go to the next slide, a disability limits the ability to perform certain tasks like seeing, reading, and walking, where a handicap refers to a problem a person with a disability encounters when interacting with the environment. For example, a child with disabled peers in a basketball game, but not handicapped when completing academically in the classroom. Generate with your group a list of 5 types of disabilities. So we're going to start in classes, we're going to start dividing into groups, and this is one of those where we divide into 2 groups. Right now it looks like there's about 7 in the class. I'm hoping there's a few more by the time we get to Tuesday night. For each disability, describe the circumstances of the environment. So you're not going to be able to do this in this part of the assignment since we are doing it online. So let's go on, but I would like for you to think about those as we're discussing impairment, disability, and handicap and at risk. You will need to know the differences. How many exceptional children are there? Right now, according to the book, there are more than 6.4 million children and youth with disabilities ages 3 to 21. receiving special services. This was found between the 2012 and 2013 school year. Children with disabilities and special education represent 13% of the school-age population. And men, twice as many males as females receive special education. And we'll talk more as we go through the different categories in this book as to why that might be. There are 3 to 5 million academically gifted and talented students in grades K through 12 in the U.S. The next one, prevalence of disability categories. You will want to know and read about in your text the specific learning disabilities and the prevalence of them, the speech or language impairments and the prevalence of them, the other health impaired, or you may in the future hear me talk about OHI and their prevalence of the disability categories, and autism and the prevalence of autism in the different disability categories. Want to talk about now some benefits of labeling and classification. This will be part of your discussion board for this week. We'll be discussing the benefits of labeling and classification. You'll go through this, and there's also a short video that's in the week 1 folder that you can go into and look at, and then go to your discussion board as part of your last assignments. But part of the benefits is recognizes meaningful differences in learning or behavior and is the first step in responding responsibly to differences. It also provides access to accommodations and services not available to persons without a label. It helps practitioners and researchers communicate with one another and classify and evaluate research findings. And it also leads to more acceptance by peers. And again, you may agree, you may disagree with this once you watch the video, but I want you to have an opinion. But this is what the book classifies as benefits. It also helps make exceptional children's special needs more visible to policymakers and the public. It enables disability and specific advocacy groups to promote specific programs and spur legislative action. It also can help with funding and resources for research, and other programs are often based on specific categories of exceptionality. So by the labeling of these students, they can kind of create numbers, and where numbers come in, it also then helps some of these groups, helps legislators, helps many different peoples with the amount of people in these. Some disadvantages. Focuses on what students cannot do, and that's one of the things that I want to stress throughout this class, is that many times teachers in the past have used this to focus on what they can't do. And due to that, many of the students have a negative, and parents for that matter, have a negative feeling about special education. It may stigmatize and lead to peer rejection. It may cause teachers to have low expectations for the student. It also may negatively affect self-esteem. So remember these as you're thinking about why labeling is good and why labeling may not be good. Often they're misused as explanatory constructs. It creates a tendency to assume all children in a category share traits, diminishing the detection and appreciation of each child's uniqueness. You know, one child with autism is granted they have the same label, but you will soon find out as we're going through this class, I'm going to use autism as an example, that they are far different. I don't think there's any two students with autism that I have worked with that actually had the same goals and the same strategies that worked for them. A disproportionate number of children from some racial or ethnic backgrounds have been assigned disability labels. It also requires for the expenditure of a great amount of money and professional and student time that might be better spent serving and evaluating the effects of intervention for struggling students. So those are the last of the disadvantages. What I want to go to next are alternatives to labeling and classification. The lowest achieving 20% and the highest achieving 20% be eligible for broad approaches to improvement of learning opportunities. The book also discusses classification according to the curriculum and skill areas that need to be learned. Use of words that help focus on the individual child and his primary role as a student. And professional and advocacy have taken differing views on these disability labels, which you'll hear a little bit of when you watch the video. And then Rose's Law changed all references to mental retardation in federal statutes to intellectual disabilities. And we'll talk about that R word as we get into another chapter. Let me get this. There we go. Here is a discussion topic that I'd like for you to write down, and I will probably ask you some of these questions when you come back in next Tuesday. What experiences have you had in your life with people with disabilities? It may be that you have a family member, maybe that you had a next door neighbor, maybe you had a student in class when you were going to school, or even a coworker that may have a disability. Were those experiences positive or negative? Think about those. And then I would be prepared to explain your response. So I would take a few minutes now while you're looking at that slide and maybe just give a paragraph to answer those questions real quick. And that way when you come back in on next Tuesday, we'll have some answers. So you can click pause right now and write down those answers to those questions. And then when you're done, you can go ahead and press play. Okay, now we're back on. Some of the laws governing the education of exceptional children, why are they necessary? Unfortunately, again, in these first two or three, we are going to have to look at dates. We are going to have to look at what laws are and what laws benefited and where they came from. So I have made sure that some of these are highlighted in red so you can remember which ones definitely you'll need to know. But you need to know that children who are different have often been denied full and fair access to educational opportunities, meaning that they were not educated in school. They were institutionalized. Where nowadays that is not the case. If you're a regular education teacher taking this class because you have to, you need to get all you can out of this because you will have special education students in your class. Separate is not equal. Special education was strongly influenced by the social developments and court decisions of the 1950s and 60s. One of those was Brown versus Board of Education. Equal protection. Park versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which talked about all children are entitled to a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE, free, appropriate public education. Then you have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which is what most of you probably will get to know quite well. The purposes were to ensure that all children have available to them a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE, to ensure that the rights of children with disabilities and their parents are protected and to assist state and local educational agencies in providing for the education of children with disabilities. Also to assist states in the implementation of a statewide comprehensive interagency system of early intervention. Ensure the necessary tools are available to improve educational results for children with disabilities and to assess and ensure the effectiveness of and efforts to educate children with disabilities. And these major principles of IDEA you do need to know. These are very important. Number 1, zero reject. Number 2, non-discriminatory evaluation. Then you have FAPE. Then you have least restrictive environment. You will hear that a lot, and then you'll get used to the term LRE, or least restrictive environment. Procedural safeguards. I'll make sure and bring one in next week so that you can see, and if you want to read one, I'll show you where you can find it. And then parent participation in shared decision making. And you'll soon learn, hopefully anyway, as long as you listen to me quite well in the next few weeks, that I do think parent communication is one of the strongest and most influential ways that you can assist students with developmental, disabilities. Other provisions of special education services for preschoolers. Then you have early intervention of infants and toddlers. You have assistive technology. You also have scientifically based instruction and also universal design for learning, or as many of you may have already heard, UDL. I'm trying to make sure. I want to look through the book as we're going through, because a lot of times I will ask to look at the book so we can go over some things. But I wanted to go ahead and look real quick. and talk about those major principles before we go too much further. Zero reject means that no child with disabilities may be excluded from a free public education regardless of the nature or severity of the disability. And this is definitely true. What you want to remember here is, the closest that you may think might be institutionalized are, Missouri schools that we may send those students that have the more severe disabilities. And of that, I want you to realize that only 1% of each district at the moment can be put into one of those schools for the severely disabled. Those state schools, as you might have termed it. Non-discriminatory evaluation means that there must be non-biased, multi-factored methods of evaluation to determine whether a child has a disability, meaning that it can't just be one test or one opinion. You have to have multiple tests, multiple areas to get the child into one of these categories. Free appropriate public education. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but all children with disabilities, regardless of the type of severity of the disability, shall receive FAPE. This means that education must be provided at public expense, that is, without cost to the child's family. An IEP must be developed and implemented to meet unique needs of every student with a disability. So that's what that is all about. The other part is procedural safeguards. There is a pack about 25 to 26 pages of procedural safeguards. Basically, those are the rights of the parents of a child with disabilities, so that they know what their responsibility is, what our responsibility is as a school district, and what we have to provide for their child. So that's what the procedural safeguards is. They also may request a due process hearing. If they don't feel like the school district is doing what they need to do, then guess what? They can call for a due process hearing, and then the school comes in to let the process hearing officer know what they did. The parent will have their arguments, and then the due process person will rule one way or the other, and it's mediated by a third party. Parent participation. Schools must collaborate needs and placement decisions. So what I want you to understand is that they have to be invited to the meeting. It is your report to the parents, so most of that IEP is the school district's report to the parents. However, the parents must be invited to the meeting, and they must give input on certain parts of that IEP. And once the student turns 14 or 16, as it is in the state of Missouri, we're required to have the students' input. However, I would also very strongly suggest that students get involved in their IEPs earlier as we get to talking about more about an IEP and about those students. Legal challenges to IDEA. We have an extended school year, that Armstrong versus Klein. Extended school year is basically meant for those students that would significantly regress on their IEP goals if they did not come to school and work on those IEP goals over the summertime. So before the school year is over, most of the time, those last month and a half or so of school, anybody that's on an IEP, those teachers will be looking to see if they would qualify as a student that needs an ESY service. And those students would be asked to come to school, and then they would work on IEP goals during that time. They don't get all their services that they would normally get, but they get all of those extended school year services so that they can not regress significantly over that time. There's FAPE and related services that was challenged by Hendrick Hudson Central School District. There's students with disabilities by Stewart and Nappy. This is a bigger issue when you start getting into suspensions and things like that. Students that are on an IEP, if they're going to be out of school for more than a certain amount of days, and we'll get into that later on, you have to have a manifestation determination meeting, which means that you get together with staff of the IEP, principal, teachers, and that sort, and you will decide, is the reason the student is getting kicked out of school related to their IEP? Well, when you have a student that has behavioral issues, or even some students with other health impairments or autism, those disabilities have parts of them that might relate to some of these issues, and then if that's the case, then they automatically come back into the school district and they cannot be suspended for those periods. So it's very important that you think about disciplining of students with IEPs. The right to education, Timothy W. and Rochester School District is also another one that you have to look at. There's another page, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act extends civil rights to people with disabilities. I want to say here that a 504 is not a part of special education. So that's one area we'll talk about later on. An IEP is a special education component. A 504 is not. That's why many schools have gotten away from somebody related to an IEP involvement doing the 504 plan. A 504 plan is a regular education component that students that don't qualify for special education might possibly qualify for a 504 plan and get some accommodations. But if they get those accommodations, they do not, and I repeat this, they do not get special education services. They're not seen by a special education teacher or in a special education resource setting. They are seen by regular education teachers to get those accommodations. And we'll discuss more about that later. No Child, let's see here, I think it advanced down, yeah. Americans with Disability Act extends civil rights. Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the No Child Left Behind Act, was set to improve the achievement of all students with a particular emphasis on children from low-income families. Then you have the No Child Left Behind Act. Requires annual assessment of at least 95% of all students in each school district in reading, math in grades 3 through 8, and at least once in grades 10 through 12. Needs to have scientifically based instruction and places special emphasis on using educational programs that rigorous scientific research has been demonstrated to be effective. Also, implications for students with disabilities. It applies to the provisions to all students, including those with disabilities. So, when it says it wants to get all students to read at a certain level, it means all students, not just those students without IEPs. What is special education as intervention? Well, you have preventative, which is to keep minor problems from becoming a disability. Primary intervention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. You also have remedial, which attempts to eliminate. It enables a successful functioning in spite of the disability. What is special education as instruction? Well, there's a who, what, the how, and the where. Who consists of the primary responsibility for helping exceptional children learn. What is it? It's differentiated, sometimes by its curriculum, by what is taught. That's why later on in this class we'll talk about differentiated instruction, and we'll have several different things that you'll do with that differentiated instruction. You'll actually have the collection that we talked about. There's also the differentiation plan that we'll talk about. How? Use of specialized or adapted materials and methods. And then the where, identified but not defined by where it takes place. Those are the what is special education. Special education definition. It's individually planned, specialized, intensive, goal-directed instruction, characterized by the use of evidence-based teaching methods, the application of which is guided by direct and frequent measures of student performance. What we mean there is each individual is different. Each individual will take lessons, will be assessed, and then according to those assessments, the teachers and parents will get together to decide what they think the best areas are for those students to be taught. If it's in math, then you're going to be looking at specialized instruction in math. If it's reading, there's specialized instruction in reading. And then if it's written expression, written language, specialized instruction in written language. That's why as a teacher, you need to make sure you understand what disability that student has. Just because a student has an IEP, just because a student goes to special education teachers does not mean that every component, every idea that's taught in your class will have to be modified or accommodated. If their special education is in reading, then reading is the only area. Now, if you're in science, that's going to affect your science reading. If we're in history, that's of course going to affect that. But if it's in written language, math may not have too much to do, except maybe when you get to story problems, things like that. So you have to think about what you want to do and where. What I'll do is I am attempting to get the first 15 minutes of Making a Difference Lasts a Lifetime. I'll attempt to get that online. If not, that will be one of the first things we do on Tuesday, because typically we would do that unless we get close enough where I show it in class on Tuesday evening. We'll see how far we get. Closing the research gap to practice gap. The book talks about improving the quality of pre- and in-service training programs. It talks about increasing the availability and quality of special education programs for gifted and talented students. And it also talks about help secondary students with disabilities transition from school to adult life. Now, each of those, the gifted and talented, there's going to be a section on it, and there's also going to be a section on the transition from school to adult life that we will go into those more in depth. Increased funding for special education. Improve the behavior and attitudes of people without disabilities towards those with disabilities. And I think that is getting better as we are including more and more students with special needs in our classroom, in our work environments. I'm also also involved in the Thrive program. Parts of this I'll bring into some of the other lessons as far as what we've seen from those students also. But also it talks about open more opportunities for individuals with disabilities to participate in the full range of residential employment and recreational options available to people without disabilities. These students are going to be adults, and eventually they're going to want to do everything that you are thinking about doing right now. They will be wanting to think about also. So we need to make sure that we can make sure and create all the opportunities we can, which means in the school setting, we may have activities that help the students know what is in your specific region or what is your specific town that those students can do, and get them involved before they leave the school setting. Apply advances in technologies that reduce or eliminate the disabling effects of physical and sensory impairments, and also increase access to assistive technology. As we get more and more techy, there's more and more things that enable students and adults with disabilities to utilize technology to help balance that playing field so that they can be doing more and more of what in the past might have been more difficult for them to do. I will have already gone through some of the state of Missouri guidelines. I'm going to include that on Tuesday instead of in this lesson. But if you want to review that, the next slide has a link that takes you to DESI that can take you to some of those items. As homework for today, you'll review that chapter, retake the chapter test. Hopefully you took it before you watched this video, but if not, go ahead, take that test. Make sure that you do the application for placement, and make sure and send it to Mr. Runyon and myself so that we both know where your ideas are that you would like to go. Make sure you get that background check completed. I won't really know much about that until Mr. Runyon's office gets back to me, so please include me in anything that you send Mr. Runyon's office. If you think you've already got a background check done that would be used still, then make sure and email both his office and CC me, and then we'll be able to tell together. My hope is that by the end of the second week, everybody will have done their background check so that all of those are done, because you cannot technically go into the school district without having that background check completed and that we can see. If you're already in a school district, then you need to get that information to Mr. Runyon, how he said in that email that I sent out a couple weeks ago. Then you need to go look at the discussion board. I'm going to go ahead now and minimize this so I can go ahead and talk about that real quick. For the discussion board, if you look now back at your Blackboard, it's right underneath tests. You'll go to discussions. And right now my internet's running slow, but you'll click discussions and you will see there's a Let's Get Acquainted. This week one discussion board is the only one that's not content related. I prefer to use this opportunity to get introductions and a sense of the special ed experience in the group. So then add your thoughts about labeling. So I want you to get on here and write a little bit about yourself. If you have some experience with special education, give us an idea of what that might be. And again, this is if you want. If you don't want to, that's fine too, but at least give us a little bit about yourself. And then make sure that you watch the YouTube video in the chapter folder and share with us what your thoughts are on labeling. And then also, if you got a picture and you want to post a picture in here of you, please post that with there. But you're going to tell us your name, major, class rank, and year, and what you hope to do when you finish school. That's number one. Tell us a little bit about what is important to you: family, friends, hobbies, social activities. Basically, give us an idea what you want, what you like. Share your experiences, if any, with special education or with individuals who have disabilities. And then you're going to share that topic about labeling. Okay, in fact, I'm going to do a quick edit here. I saw something I need to change there. Okay, now that's updated. Okay, so that's the discussion board. Let me go back to where we are with my notes. Okay, then you'll complete your quiz again if you wish and get ready for next week's chapter. I'll always try to remind you to go ahead and get that done. That's all part of it. Then there's also, remember, you can look back at Chapter 1 notes and lectures, so you can read. That's kind of a little sheet for you to have. It talks about disabilities. It goes a little bit more in depth about exceptional children, why we label. So it's another tool that you can use to help you with understanding of this first chapter and doing well on the test. Talks about impairment, disability, and handicapped and at risk. Federal legislation, IDEA. Talks about everything that you might need to know. So let me go back to course documents and week 1 folder. Oh, about 42 minutes, so not too far yet. There's the benefits of labeling right underneath the Chapter 1 folder. That's the one that you'll want to click to read more about labeling, a student's perspective. Chapter 1 quiz will be available after October 8th, so it'll show up. Reminder that it's good to have all of these assignments done by Sunday so that you're ready to go for the next week on Monday morning. And that is it for week 1 altogether. So if you have questions, please email me. I do want to remind you that next Tuesday, what we will be doing is we will be switching our classrooms to a classroom in the library called the ALEC classroom. I'll give you more details on that on Tuesday night, but just a reminder that next Tuesday we will not be meeting in this classroom. We will actually meet in the ALEC classroom, and I'll keep you updated. Just as a reminder, watch your emails. If for some reason I do need to make one of the classes video like this again, I will give you advance warning and give you a video similar to this, and that way it can help you stay on track and us stay on track. So anyway, hope you have a good Thursday night and the rest of the week, and I will see you next Tuesday.